Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Part 3. Mergers. May 16th to July 11th. 13% of the women in Sweden have been subjected to aggravated sexual assault outside of a sexual relationship. Chapter 15. Friday, May 16th to Saturday, May 31st. Michael Blomkvist was released from Rullaker prison on Friday, May 16th, 2 months after he was admitted. The same day he entered the facility, he had submitted an application for parole, with no great optimism. He never did quite understand the technical reasons behind his release, but it may have had something to do with the fact that he did not use any holiday leave and that the prison population was 42 while the number of beds was 31. In any case, the warden, Peter Sarowski, a 40-year-old Polish exile, with whom Blomkvist got along well, wrote a recommendation that his sentence be reduced. His time at Rullaker had been unstressful and pleasant enough. The prison had been designed, as Sarowski expressed it, for hooligans and drunk drivers, not for hardened criminals. The daily routines reminded him of living in a youth hostel. His fellow prisoners, half of whom were second-generation immigrants, regarded Blomkvist as something of a rare bird in the group. He was the only inmate to appear on the TV news, which lent him a certain status. On his first day, he was called in for a talk and offered therapy, training from Komvu, or the opportunity for other adult education, and occupational counseling. He did not feel any need at all for social rehabilitation. He had completed his studies, he thought, and he already had a job. On the other hand, he asked for permission to keep his iBook in his cell so that he could continue to work on the book he was commissioned to write. His request was granted without further ado, and Sarowski arranged to bring him a lockable cabinet so that he could leave the computer in his cell. Not that any of the inmates would have stolen or vandalized it or anything like that. They rather kept a protective eye on him. In this way Blomkvist spent 2 months working about 6 hours a day on the Wenger Family Chronicle, work that was interrupted only by a few hours of cleaning or recreation each day. Blomkvist and 2 others, one of whom came from Skavda and had his roots in Chile, were assigned to clean the prison gym each day. Recreation consisted of watching TV, playing cards, or weight training. Blomkvist discovered that he was a passable poker player, but he still lost a few 50-öre coins every day. Regulations permitted playing for money if the total pot did not exceed 5 kroner. He was told of his release only 1 day before. Sarowski summoned him to his office and they shared a toast with aquavit. Blomkvist went straight back to the cabin in Hedeby. When he walked up the front steps he heard a meow and found himself escorted by the reddish-brown cat. "Okay, you can come in," he said. "But I have no milk yet." He unpacked his bags. It was as if he had been on holiday, and he realized that he actually missed the company of Sarowski and his fellow prisoners. Absurd as it seemed, he had enjoyed his time at Rullaker, but his release had come so unexpectedly that he had had no time to let anyone know. It was just after 6 o'clock in the evening. He hurried over to Konsum to buy groceries before they closed. When he got home he called Berger. A message said she was unavailable. He asked for her to call him the next day. Then he walked up to his employer's house. He found Wenger on the ground floor. The old man raised his eyebrows in surprise when he saw Michael. "Did you escape? Released early. That's a surprise." "For me too. I found out last night." They looked at each other for a few seconds. Then the old man surprised Blomkvist by throwing his arms around him and giving him a bear hug. "I was just about to eat. Join me." Anna produced a great quantity of bacon pancakes with lingonberries. They sat there in the dining room and talked for almost 2 hours. Blomkvist told him about how far he had got with the Family Chronicle, and where there were holes and gaps. They did not talk at all about Harriet, but Wenger told him all about Millennium. "We had a board meeting. Fröken Berger and your partner Mom were kind enough to move 2 of the meetings up here, while Dirch stood in for me at a meeting in Stockholm. I really wish I were a few years younger, but the truth is that it's too tiring for me to travel so far. I'll try to get down there during the summer. No reason not to hold the meetings up here, Blomkvist said. So how does it feel to be a part owner of the magazine? Wenger gave him a wry smile. It's actually the most fun I've had in years. I've taken a look at the finances, and they look pretty fair. I won't have to put up as much money as I thought. The gap between income and expenses is dwindling. I talked with Erica this week. She says that advertising revenue has perked up. It's starting to turn around, yes, but it'll take time. At first the companies in the Wenger Corporation went in and bought up a bunch of full-page ads. But 2 former advertisers, mobile telephones and a travel bureau, have come back. He smiled broadly. We're also doing a little more one-to-one hustling among Wennerstrom's enemies. And, believe me, there's a long list. Have you heard directly from Wennerstrom? Well, not really. But we leaked a story that Wennerstrom is organizing the boycott of Millennium. That must have made him look petty. A reporter at DN is said to have reached him and got a surly reply. You are enjoying this, aren't you? Enjoy isn't the word. I should have devoted myself to this years ago. What is it between you and Wennerstrom, anyway? Don't even try. You'll find out at the end of your year. When Blomkvist left Wenger around 9 o'clock, there was a distinct feeling of spring in the air. It was dark outside and he hesitated for a moment. Then he made his familiar circuit and knocked on the door of Cecilia Wenger's house. He wasn't sure what he expected. Cecilia opened her eyes wide and instantly looked uncomfortable as she led him into the hall. They stood there, suddenly unsure of each other. She too asked if he had escaped, and he explained the situation. I just wanted to say hello. Am I interrupting something? She avoided his eyes. Michael could sense at once that she wasn't particularly glad to see him. No, come in. Would you like some coffee? I would. He followed her into the kitchen. She stood with her back to him as she filled the coffee maker with water. He put a hand on her shoulder, and she stiffened. Cecilia, you don't look as if you want to give me coffee. I wasn't expecting you for another month, she said. You surprised me. He turned her around so that he could see her face. They stood in silence for a moment. She still would not look him in the eye. Cecilia. Forget about the coffee. What's going on? She shook her head and took a deep breath. Michael, I'd like you to leave. Don't ask. Just leave. Michael first walked back to the cottage, but paused at the gate, undecided. Instead of going in, he went down to the water by the bridge and sat on a rock. He smoked a cigarette while he sorted out his thoughts and wondered what could have so dramatically changed Cecilia Wenger's attitude towards him. He suddenly heard the sound of an engine and saw a big white boat slip into the sound beneath the bridge. When it passed, Michael saw that it was Martin Wenger standing at the wheel, with his gaze focused on avoiding sunken rocks in the water. The boat was a 40-foot motor cruiser, an impressive bundle of power. He stood up and took the beach path. He discovered that several boats were already in the water at various docks, a mixture of motorboats and sailing boats. There were several Peterson boats, and at one dock an F-class yacht was rocking in the wake. Other boats were larger and more expensive vessels. He noticed a Hallberg Rassi. The boats also indicated the class distribution of Hedeby's marina. Martin Wenger had without a doubt the largest and the plushest boat in view. He stopped below Cecilia Wenger's house and stole a glance at the lighted windows on the top floor. Then he went home and put on some coffee of his own. He went into his office while he waited for it to brew. Before he presented himself at the prison, he had returned the majority of Wenger's documentation on Harriet. It had seemed wise not to leave it in an empty house. Now the shelves looked bare. He had, of the reports, only 5 of Wenger's own notebooks, and these he had taken with him to Rullaker and now knew by heart. He noticed an album on the top shelf of the bookcase that he had forgotten. He carried it to the kitchen table. He poured himself coffee and began going through it. They were photographs that had been taken on the day Harriet disappeared. The first of them was the last photograph of Harriet, at the Children's Day Parade in Hedeby. Then there were some 180 crystal clear pictures of the scene of the accident on the bridge. He had examined the images one by one with a magnifying glass on several occasions previously. Now he turned the pages almost absent-mindedly. He knew he was not going to find anything he had not seen before. In fact, he felt all of a sudden fed up with the unexplainable disappearance of Harriet Wenger and slammed the album shut. Restlessly, he went to the kitchen window and peered out into the darkness. Then he turned his gaze back to the album. He could not have explained the feeling, but a thought flitted through his head, as though he were reacting to something he had just seen. It was as though an invisible creature had whispered in his ear, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He opened the album again. He went through it page by page, looking at all the pictures of the bridge. He looked at the younger version of an oil-soaked Henrik Wenger and a younger Harold, a man whom he had still not met. The broken railing, the buildings, the windows and the vehicles visible in the pictures. He could not fail to identify a 20-year-old Cecilia in the midst of the onlookers. She had on a light-colored dress and a dark jacket and was in at least 20 of the photographs. He felt a fresh excitement, and over the years Blomkvist had learned to trust his instincts. These instincts were reacting to something in the album, but he could not yet say what it was. He was still at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock, staring one by one again at the photographs when he heard the door open. "May I come in?" It was Cecilia Wenger. Without waiting for an answer, she sat down across from him at the table. Blomkvist had a strange feeling of déjà vu. She was dressed in a thin, loose, light-colored dress and a grayish-blue jacket, clothes almost identical to those she was wearing in the photographs from 1966. "You're the one who's the problem," she said. Blomkvist raised his eyebrows. "Forgive me, but you took me by surprise when you knocked on the door tonight. Now I'm so unhappy I can't sleep." "Why are you unhappy? Don't you know?" He shook his head. "If I tell you, promise you won't laugh." "Promise." "When I seduced you last winter, it was an idiotic, impulsive act. I wanted to enjoy myself, that's all. That first night I was quite drunk, and I had no intention of starting anything long-term with you. Then it turned into something else. I want you to know that those weeks with you as my occasional lover were some of the happiest in my life. I thought it was lovely too. Michael, I've been lying to you and to myself the whole time. I've never been particularly relaxed about sex. I've had 5 sex partners in my entire life. Once when I was 21 and a debutante. Then with my husband, whom I met when I was 25 and who turned out to be a bastard. And then a few times with 3 guys I met several years apart. But you provoked something in me. I simply couldn't get enough. It had something to do with the fact that you're so undemanding." "Cecilia, you don't have to." "Shush. Don't interrupt, or I'll never be able to tell you this." Blomkvist sat in silence. "The day you left for prison I was absolutely miserable. You were gone, as though you had never existed. It was dark here in the guest house. It was cold and empty in my bed. And there I was, an old maid of 56 again." She said nothing for a while and looked Blomkvist in the eyes. "I fell in love with you last winter. I didn't mean to, but it happened. And then I took stock and realized that you were only here temporarily. One day you'll be gone for good, and I'll stay here for the rest of my life. It hurt so damn much that I decided I wasn't going to let you in again when you came back from prison. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. When you left tonight I sat and cried. I wish I had the chance to live my life over again. Then I would decide on one thing." "What's that?" She looked down at the table. "That I would have to be totally insane to stop seeing you just because you're going to leave one day. Michael, can we start again? Can you forget what happened earlier this evening?" "It's forgotten," he said. "But thank you for telling me." She was still looking down at the table. If you still want me, let's do it. She looked at him again. Then she got up and went over to the bedroom door. She dropped her jacket on the floor and pulled her dress over her head as she went. Blomkvist and Cecilia Vanger woke up when the front door opened and someone was walking through the kitchen. They heard the thud of something heavy being put down near the wood stove. Then Berger was standing in the bedroom doorway with a smile that rapidly changed to shock. Oh, good Lord, she took a step back. Hi, Erica, Blomkvist said. Hi. I'm so sorry. I apologize 1,000 times for barging in like this. I should have knocked. We should have locked the front door. Erica, this is Cecilia Vanger. Cecilia, Erica Berger is the editor-in-chief of Millennium. Hi, Cecilia said. Hi, Berger said. She looked as though she could not decide whether to step forward and politely shake hands or just leave. I can go for a walk. What do you say to putting on some coffee instead? Blomkvist looked at the alarm clock on the bedside table. Just past noon. Berger nodded and pulled the bedroom door shut. Blomkvist and Cecilia looked at each other. Cecilia appeared embarrassed. They had made love and talked until 4 o'clock in the morning. Then Cecilia said she thought she'd sleep over and that in the future she wouldn't give a tinker's cuss who knew she was sleeping with Michael Blomkvist. She had slept with her back to him and with his arm tucked around her breasts. Listen, it's okay, he said. Erica's married and she isn't my girlfriend. We see each other now and then, but she doesn't care at all if you and I have something. She's probably pretty embarrassed herself right now. When they went into the kitchen a while later, Erica had set out coffee, juice, lemon marmalade, cheese, and toast. It smelled good. Cecilia went straight up to her and held out her hand. I was a little abrupt in there. Hi. Dear Cecilia, I'm so sorry for stomping in like an elephant, said a very embarrassed Erica Berger. Forget it, for God's sake. And let's have breakfast. After breakfast, Berger excused herself and left them alone, saying that she had to go and say hello to Vanger. Cecilia cleared the table with her back to Michael. He went up and put his arms around her. What's going to happen now? Cecilia said. Nothing. This is the way it is. Erica is my best friend. She and I have been together off and on for 20 years and will probably be, on and off, together for another 20. I hope so. But we've never been a couple and we never get in the way of each other's romances. Is that what we have? A romance? I don't know what we have, but apparently we get along. Where's she going to sleep tonight? We'll find her a room somewhere. One of Henrik's spare rooms. She won't be sleeping in my bed, anyway. Cecilia thought about this for a moment. I don't know if I can handle this. You and she might function that way, but I don't know. I've never. She shook her head. I'm going back to my place. I have to think about this for a while. Cecilia, you asked me earlier and I told you about my relationship with Erica. Her existence can't be any great surprise to you. That's true. But as long as she was at a comfortable distance down in Stockholm, I could ignore her. Cecilia put on her jacket. This situation is ludicrous, she said with a smile. Come over for dinner tonight. Bring Erica. I think I'm going to like her. Erica had already solved the problem of where to sleep. On previous occasions when she had been up to Hedeby to visit Vanger, she had stayed in one of his spare rooms, and she asked him straight out if she could borrow the room again. Henrik could scarcely conceal his delight, and he assured her that she was welcome at any time. With these formalities out of the way, Blomkvist and Berger went for a walk across the bridge and sat on the terrace of Suzanne's Bridge Cafe just before closing time. I'm really pissed off, Berger said. I drive all the way up here to welcome you back to freedom and find you in bed with the town femme fatale. I'm sorry about that. How long have you and Miss Big Tits? Berger waved her index finger. From about the time Vanger became part owner. Aha. What do you mean, aha? Just curious. Cecilia's a good woman. I like her. I'm not criticizing. I'm just pissed off. Candy within reach and then I have to go on a diet. How was prison? Like an uneventful holiday. How are things at the magazine? Better. For the first time in a year, the advertising revenue is on the rise. We're way below this time last year, but we've turned the corner. Thanks to Henrik. But the weird thing is that subscriptions are going up too. They tend to fluctuate by a couple of hundred one way or the other. But we've picked up 3,000 in the past quarter. At first I thought it was just luck, but new subscribers keep coming in. It's our biggest subscription jump ever. At the same time, our existing subscribers are renewing pretty consistently across the board. None of us can understand it. We haven't run any ad campaigns. Krister spent a week doing spot checks on what sort of demographic is showing up. First, they're all brand new subscribers. Second, 70% of them are women. Normally it's the other way around. Third, the subscribers can be described as middle-income white-collar workers from the suburbs. Teachers, middle management, civil service workers. Think it's the middle-class revolt against big capital? I don't know. But if this keeps up, it'll mean a significant shift in our subscriber profile. We had an editorial conference 2 weeks ago and decided to start running new types of material in the magazine. I want more articles on professional matters associated with TCO, the Swedish Confederation of Professional Employees, and also more investigative reporting on women's issues, for instance. Don't change too much, Blomkvist said. If we're getting new subscribers, then it means that they like what we're running already. Cecilia had also invited Vanger to dinner, possibly to reduce the risk of troublesome topics of conversation. She had made a venison stew. Berger and Vanger spent a good deal of the time discussing Millennium's development and the new subscribers, but gradually the conversation moved on to other matters. Berger suddenly turned to Blomkvist at one point and asked him how his work was coming along. I'm counting on having a draft of the Family Chronicle complete in a month for Henrik to look at. A chronicle in the spirit of the Addams family, Cecilia said. It does have certain historical aspects, Blomkvist conceded. Cecilia glanced at Vanger. Michael, Henrik isn't really interested in a family chronicle. He wants you to solve the mystery of Harriet's disappearance. Blomkvist did not say a word. Ever since he had begun his relationship with Cecilia, he had talked fairly openly about Harriet with her. Cecilia had already deduced that this was his real assignment, even though he never formally admitted it. He had certainly never told Henrik that he and Cecilia had discussed the subject. Vanger's bushy eyebrows drew together a bit. Erika was silent. My dear Henrik, Cecilia said. I'm not stupid. I don't know what sort of agreement you and Michael have, but his stay here in Hedeby is about Harriet. It is, isn't it? Vanger nodded and glanced at Blomkvist. I told you she was sharp. He turned to Berger. I presume that Michael has explained to you what he's working on here in Hedeby. She nodded. And I presume you think it's a senseless undertaking. No, you don't have to answer that. It is an absurd and senseless task. But I have to find out. I have no opinion on the matter, Berger said diplomatically. Of course you do. He turned to Blomkvist. Tell me, have you found anything at all that might take us forward? Blomkvist avoided meeting Vanger's gaze. He thought instantly of the cold, unplaceable certainty he had had the night before. The feeling had been with him all day, but he had had no time to work his way through the album again. At last he looked up at Vanger and shook his head. I haven't found a single thing. The old man scrutinized him with a penetrating look. He refrained from commenting. I don't know about you young people, he said, but for me it's time to go to bed. Thank you for dinner, Cecilia. Good night, Erika. Do see me before you leave tomorrow. When Vanger had closed the front door, silence settled over them. It was Cecilia who spoke first. Michael, what was all that about? It means that Henrik is as sensitive to people's reactions as a seismograph. Last night when you came to the cottage I was looking through an album. Yes? I saw something. I don't know what it was yet. It was something that almost became an idea, but I missed it. So what were you thinking about? I just can't tell you. And then you arrived. Cecilia blushed. She avoided Berger's gaze and went out to put on some coffee. It was a warm and sunny day. New green shoots were appearing, and Blomkvist caught himself humming the old song of spring, "Blossom time is coming." It was Monday and Berger had left early. When he had gone to prison in mid-March, snow still covered the land. Now the birches were turning green and the lawn around his cabin was lush. For the first time he had a chance to look around all of Hedeby Island. At 8 o'clock he went over and asked to borrow a thermos from Anna. He spoke briefly with Vanger, who was just up, and was given his map of the island. He wanted to get a closer look at Gottfried's cabin. Vanger told him that the cabin was owned by Martin Vanger now, but that it had stood mostly vacant over the years. Occasionally some relative would borrow it. Blomkvist just managed to catch Martin before he left for work. He asked if he might borrow the key. Martin gave him an amused smile. I presume the family chronicle has now reached the chapter about Harriet. I just want to take a look. Martin came back with the key in a minute. Is it okay then? As far as I'm concerned, you can move in there if you want. Except for the fact that it's stuck right at the other end of the island, it's actually a nicer spot than the cottage you're in. Blomkvist made coffee and sandwiches. He filled a bottle with water before he set off, stuffing his picnic lunch in a rucksack he slung over one shoulder. He followed a narrow, partially overgrown path that ran along the bay on the north side of Hedeby Island. Gottfried's cabin was on a point about 1.5 miles from the village, and it took him only half an hour to cover the distance at a leisurely pace. Martin Vanger had been right. When Blomkvist came around the bend of the narrow path, a shaded area by the water opened up. There was a marvelous view of the inlet to the Hed River, Hedestad Marina to the left, and the industrial harbor to the right. He was surprised that no one had wanted to move into Gottfried's cabin. It was a rustic structure made of horizontal dark-stained timber with a tile roof and green frames, and with a small porch at the front door. The maintenance of the cabin had been neglected. The paint around the doors and windows was flaking off, and what should have been a lawn was scrub a yard high. Clearing it would take one whole day's hard work with scythe and saw. Blomkvist unlocked the door and unscrewed the shutters over the windows from the inside. The framework seemed to be an old barn of less than 1,300 square feet. The inside was finished with planks and consisted of one room with big windows facing the water on either side of the front door. A staircase led to an open sleeping loft at the rear of the cabin that covered half the space. Beneath the stairs was a niche with a propane gas stove, a counter, and a sink. The furnishings were basic. Built into the wall to the left of the door there was bench, a rickety desk, and above it a bookcase with teak shelves. Farther down on the same side was a broad wardrobe. To the right of the door was a round table with 5 wooden chairs. A fireplace stood in the middle of the side wall. The cabin had no electricity. Instead, there were several kerosene lamps. In one window was an old Grundig transistor radio. The antenna was broken off. Blomkvist pressed the power button, but the batteries were dead. He went up the narrow stairs and looked around the sleeping loft. There was a double bed with a bare mattress, a bedside table, and a chest of drawers. Blomkvist spent a while searching through the cabin. The bureau was empty except for some hand towels and linen smelling faintly of mold. In the wardrobe there were some work clothes, a pair of overalls, rubber boots, a pair of worn tennis shoes, and a kerosene stove. In the desk drawers were writing paper, pencils, a blank sketchpad, a deck of cards, and some bookmarks. The kitchen cupboard contained plates, mugs, glasses, candles, and some packages of salt, tea bags, and the like. In a drawer in the table there were eating utensils. He found the only traces of any intellectual interests on the bookcase above the desk. Michael brought over a chair and got up on it to see what was on the shelves. On the lowest shelf lay issues of Say, Record Magasinet, Tidsfordriv, and Lecter from the late 50s and early 60s. There were several Bildjournalen from 1965 and 1966, Matt Liv's novelle, and a few comic books. The 91, Phantomen, and Romans. He opened a copy of Lecter from 1964 and smiled to see how chaste the pinup was. Of the books, about half were mystery paperbacks from Wallström's Manhattan series. Mickey Spillane with titles like Kiss Me, Deadly with the classic covers by Bertil Hägglund. He found half a dozen kiddie books, some famous 5 novels by Enid Blyton, and a twin mystery by Sivert Allred, The Metro Mystery. He smiled in recognition. 3 books by Astrid Lindgren. The Children of Noisy Village, Kalle Blomkvist and Rasmus, and Pippi Longstocking. The top shelf had a book about shortwave radio, 2 books on astronomy, a bird guidebook, a book called The Evil Empire on the Soviet Union, a book on the Finnish Winter War, Luther's Catechism, the Book of Hymns, and the Bible. He opened the Bible and read on the inside cover. Harriet Wenger, May 12, 1963. It was her confirmation Bible. He sadly put it back on the shelf. Behind the cabin there were a wood and tool shed with a scythe, rake, hammer, and a big box with saws, planes, and other tools. He took a chair onto the porch and poured coffee from his thermos. He lit a cigarette and looked across Hedestad Bay through the veil of undergrowth. Gottfried's cabin was much more modest than he had expected. Here was the place to which Harriet and Martin's father had retreated when his marriage to Isabella was going to the dogs in the late 50s. He had made this cabin his home, and here he got drunk. And down there, near the wharf, he had drowned. Life at the cabin had probably been pleasant in the summer, but when the temperature dropped to freezing it must have been raw and wretched. According to what Wenger told him, Gottfried continued to work in the Wenger Corporation, interrupted by periods when he was on wild binges, until 1964. The fact that he was able to live in the cabin more or less permanently and still appear for work shaven, washed, and in a jacket and tie spoke of a surviving personal discipline. And here was also the place that Harriet had been to so often that it was one of the first in which they looked for her. Wenger had told him that during her last year, Harriet had gone often to the cabin, apparently to be in peace on weekends or holidays. In her last summer she had lived here for 3 months, though she came into the village every day. Anita Wenger, Cecilia's sister, spent 6 weeks with her here. What had she done out here all alone? The magazines Mit Liv's novelle and romans, as well as a number of books about Kitty, must have been hers. Perhaps the sketchpad had been hers. And her Bible was here. She had wanted to be close to her lost father. Was it a period of mourning she needed to get through? Or did it have to do with her religious brooding? The cabin was Spartan. Was she pretending to live in a convent? Blomkvist followed the shoreline to the southeast, but the way was so interrupted by ravines and so grown over with juniper shrubs that it was all but impassable. He went back to the cabin and started back on the road to Hedeby. According to the map there was a path through the woods to something called the fortress. It took him 20 minutes to find it in the overgrown scrub. The fortress was what remained of the shoreline defense from the Second World War. Concrete bunkers with trenches spread out around a command building. Everything was overrun with long grass and scrub. He walked down a path to a boathouse. Next to the boathouse he found the wreck of a Peterson boat. He returned to the fortress and took a path up to a fence. He had come to Ostergarden from the other side. He followed the meandering path through the woods, roughly parallel to the fields of Ostergarden. The path was difficult to negotiate. There were patches of marsh that he had to skirt. Finally he came to a swamp and beyond it a barn. As far as he could see the path ended there, 100 yards from the road to Ostergarden. Beyond the road lay the hill, Soderberget. Blomkvist walked up a steep slope and had to climb the last bit. Soderberget's summit was an almost vertical cliff facing the water. He followed the ridge back towards Hedeby. He stopped above the summer cottages to enjoy the view of the old fishing harbor and the church and his own cottage. He sat on a flat rock and poured himself the last of the lukewarm coffee. Cecilia Wenger kept her distance. Blomkvist did not want to be importunate, so he waited a week before he went to her house. She let him in. You must think I'm quite foolish, a 56-year-old, respectable headmistress acting like a teenage girl. Cecilia, you're a grown woman. You have the right to do whatever you want. I know, and that's why I've decided not to see you anymore. I can't stand. Please, you don't owe me an explanation. I hope we're still friends. I would like for us to remain friends. But I can't deal with a relationship with you. I haven't ever been good at relationships. I'd like it if you would leave me in peace for a while.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.